Good afternoon. I am Anto Budiojo. This is Monday Live, something that we do every Monday. Welcome to everybody. We are here to discuss the advances in smart buildings, figure out what the future holds. Panelists are listed on mondaylive.org. The most important point I need to make is that the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please use the Zoom tools, as I think we all know by now. And also a reminder, this deck is on mondaylive.org right there on the homepage in case you want to see or use any of the links that we have provided. So our theme this month of November is clarity. We're trying to figure out, after having gone through this really hard year, whether we see any sort of clarity in terms of the future of smarter buildings. The agenda today, our normal chit chat on news and trends, and then we have James Dice and Joe Aamidor who will be joining us. That should be a really interesting discussion to see if they see any clarity going forward. So, but before we do that, hand it over to Ken, first of all. What's going on, Ken?
Thanks, Anto. Well, we've got our issue online, and we started out with trying to create clarity, and we found that a lot of what clarity is about is just defining the face of change, and wrote that second article to try and address that. We're also hard at working on our December issue, which will be vetting Vegas. I think everybody's is thinking about going to Vegas and thinking how they're going to leverage it. There's a lot of vetting going on in people's minds. And of course, it's our first face-to-face major event of 2022. And we're very happy to have our 12 free Las Vegas education sessions, which a lot of the people on the Zoom screen here are part of. It's our 22nd year of presenting this. We were always out of sync, but since we missed Chicago last year, we're now back in sync with the year we started in 2000. Very pleased to have Scott Cochran and the Cochran team supporting us. Scott and I have been doing these probably last 4 or 5 years together, and he's going to be providing the on-site service. This article caught my attention. Smart buildings are stupid hard, and here's how to fix them. And the basic upshot of it is why are they stupid hard? Because they're all snowflakes. And they're custom built for one instance and one physical building. And, so after 50 years in the industry, it kind of dawns on me, yeah, that's very true. And that's what causes our industry's flakiness. And we're always kind of in a state of being flaky. And so whether you agree or disagree with MAP, you're just another industry flake. So, and when you touch a snowflake, it is forever changed. So I think that's kind of another feed through. Interesting discussion with John and Sean Cooley of MAPT, just how they see this rolling down. So take a look at that YouTube, and again, take a look at my LinkedIn shares. Always a lot of activity there and a lot of good input from the industry. I think that's about it. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, Ken. So who do we have next? John, over to you.
Yeah, hi. So a couple of topics here on a theme I brought up a few times, the whole greenwashing and, our financial regulators starting to take climate change seriously. I thought that's interesting. There's more and more, as there's greater societal focus on sustainability, of course, there's more legal and financial issues involved in it. And the other one, I don't know how many people know the name Jigar Shah, but he has now joined the U.S. Department of Energy. He wrote interesting books. He has a podcast. He's a long time working in the energy industry. And he heads the loan programs office. But what I thought was interesting is it's been around for 16 years, and it's got the capacity to put $46 billion in lending authority into the market. And so, the article is that he's really focused on making this happen and getting that money out there to good investments. And, that bulk of money may be increased due to other legislation, but as it stands right there, he's got significant financial resources, and he's trying to bring it out there to accelerate climate tech.
He was also one of the founders of one of the initial solar companies, Sun Edison, or
yeah, I think that's what it was, Sun Edison. Yeah.
So,
really interesting guy, really committed to the whole,
Yeah.
initiative of energy efficiency and sustainability. So,
yeah, great. Anno.
Yeah, hello everyone. Just continuing on my theme of what's happening in prop tech investments that I've seen in the last few months. This one is courtesy of JLL, but I think Scott's not on today. But thanks, Scott. Interesting graph. Graphs are good. You can see there's been the significant spike in 27, 18, 19 of prop tech investments in the last 5 years. 2021, that number there is actually just for the first half. So, I expect that to, add another half or less than that. So they see another major spike for 2021 and going into 2022 as well. Interesting perspective, right, from a clarity, because there's a lot of prop tech technologies. Getting a lot of investment dollars, getting a lot of initiatives, which brings new ideas, new thoughts, new approaches, new technologies into the marketplace. Also has the opportunity to confuse and make less clear sometimes as new ideas come into the market space. So interesting graph, and it's actually good for our industry at the end of the day, because it's showing where there's a lot of interest in the property technology market.
Great, thank you, Anno. Roger.
Yeah, it's following on from Anno's theme, actually. I think it's interesting to see how, obviously a lot of the companies invested in our industry follow on much later than some of the other big investments that have been made. But literally, as you can see there, VergeSense and Density, which are kind of related to our industry with the space analytics, and Density now with their valuation makes them probably the first unicorn in our industry. But there may be more, because, as I say, people have been investing in these as Series C and D rounds, whereas I think a lot of people have sort of just had the A's and B's, and we might see some of the bigger ones. So I think it's all good news, and you can see it every day. New companies getting invested in, and as Anno's graph there shows, it's really still taking off this year. It's bouncing back, so I think it's exciting times that finally, we're getting money thrown at the industry.
Great.
It's interesting, Roger. Sorry, just on this one, there's actually a US company that we've just done some work with, and they too had they do video occupancy analytics. So they use AI machine learning on video to do occupancy and traffic flow and usage patterns and all that sort of stuff. And they've just had a significant round of similar numbers this last few months.
Yeah, certainly space analytics, the hot one at the moment.
Yep.
Great. So next will be me. So this is actually Jim Lee brought this to my attention. The creation of an international sustainability standards board. This came one of the outcomes of COP26 that just recently concluded in Glasgow. There's a sister organization called the International Accounting Standards Board. So it's they're trying to model a sustainability version of that. I don't know how effective these international standards boards are. I don't know if anybody else does on this call. And Jim, did you have any additional thoughts on this?
No, I just thought it was interesting that coming out of COP26, we have a sense that people are trying to put metrics on, and we know many other groups are trying to put metrics on. So I just thought I would surface it, but I don't have any strong opinion as to who's going to be successful with what metrics at this point.
It's something to keep an eye on. Great.
Right.
And the other chart, not so good chart, the number of cases, COVID cases, is picking up again, leading up to Thanksgiving. So I hope everybody has a good but safe Thanksgiving. So
Yeah, I think,
Just
and
keep-
Anthony, there's Europe is obviously beginning to struggle a bit again, but certainly Central Europe with Germany and Austria, but they're very low on their vaccination. You know, it's perhaps about 60-odd%. There was a great phrase came out of Germany from the health ministry. He said, by the end of Q1, people are either going to be double vaxxed, cured, or dead.
let us move on that happy note.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got one that I
Go
did
ahead.
not get a chance to put a slide on, but again, it's, has to do with our theme this month, clarity. And what's interesting is that there's still camps with respect to supply chain, more focused in on chips and components for things like hardware in our industry and whatever. And there's been a lot of camps that say it will continue through the end of 2022, and they'll see some light at the end of the tunnel on early 2023. However, last week, JP Morgan kind of shocked the industry a little bit and said, nope, they kind of see it as getting better, improving in mid-year 2022. So it's kind of nice to see that there's some people who are coming out now as far as looking at this a little bit differently and whatnot. And what's also interesting, just a thing, is that I've started to notice manufacturers of the components, while they've been raising the rates and whatever, a couple in our industry have announced surcharges now as a result of all this. I think all the suppliers were trying to keep it pretty steady, but noticed there's a couple announced last week, some significant surcharges on their controllers and so forth and so on. So just something to keep in mind.
Any other comments from anyone before we move on? Okay, that being a no, I'm going to bring on our guests, Joe, and I'm going to bring on slowly here. Come on, menu. There you go. Hello, Joe, and James is just on his way in.
Hi, Anto.
Joe.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yeah, loud and clear. And I see James as well. Yeah, I've gotten rid of the slides. So welcome you two. You've been on Monday Live before, so welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really great to have you two together as well to talk about what the hell's going on and this clarity thing that we're talking about. So let me start with you, Joe, and then we can move on to James. We've gone through quite a year this year, obviously trying to come through the pandemic, and we're not sure whether we're totally out of it yet, but let's put that aside. Are you seeing any sort of clarity of what's going on in the industry? Is it sort of pointing in a certain direction? Is there coalescing something? And then, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's something, I think about directly a fair bit, and then just indirectly.
Your audio is a little roboty.
Oh, is it?
Good for me.
So maybe we can go to James first, and then
is it still bad?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
I think
it's good. Good for us.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you can leave and come back. Sorry.
No, Anto, Joe's good, man.
It's me. Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Okay.
All right.
And the funny part, Joseph, is Anto was so proud of his new headset that he just got.
Oh, I missed that part. And everyone, you can call me Joe. I think it just defaults to Joseph. I mean, Joseph is fine.
I'm sorry, Joseph.
Yeah, but Joe's fine. No, I'll be quick, and then James, and we can just kind of go back and forth. So I think that the one area of clarity is that I think it's more widely recognized that the way we manage our buildings is insufficient, and there are technology solutions that can either augment or replace current manual and maybe older technology type versions. So I think that is widely recognized. I think that the use cases for a smart building, if you think of that as a monolithic thing, really it's not monolithic, but if you think of it that way, just for simplicity's sake, there's definitely more recognition that that's important to a wider range of people that are actual decision makers, actual buyers, actual users. And one good example of that is that you just see more articles in mainstream media about things that you could argue were previously kind of esoteric, like how does HVAC work? How do we ventilate buildings? That's obviously important in a pandemic and people want to know that. But the fact that they now know that, I think, raises their awareness to call the landlord, call the owner of the building, their facilities team, if it's a corporate, to say, you know, what is the air quality in this space? And when did you last replace the air filters? And you know, we're still not at the point where everyone knows exactly what every building needs, especially the mainstream users of the buildings. But the awareness has been raised to a point, and I think that's where there is some clarity. The last thing I'll say, in summary, you just can't ignore the performance of your buildings anymore, regardless of who you are. And I think that's more clear than it was even a year or two, I guess 2 or 3 years ago.
That's great. That's actually something that we haven't seen for many years, that people
Right.
actually know there's something here. So that's wonderful input. Great.
Yeah.
James, what's your views on this? Do you see some clarity?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Anto, you got your headphones off, so ditch those.
Going back to Amazon.
I mean, I think you guys probably have this feeling a lot more intensely than people like Joe and I do, but there's been a lot of like pinch me moments lately where it's like a lot of us thinking back on our careers and going, you know, I could not imagine this conversation to be like, I could not imagine this conversation happening in 2012, 2013. That's the kind of reactions I've been having. You guys would probably have that from the 90s or wherever else you started your career. John started a long time before that. So there's these like pinch me moments where it's like, I can't believe that this is happening. Like I just had one conversation last week with an energy manager, and he put me on mute because the CEO was calling him to talk to him about like reporting on net zero to their investors. And so I think there's a ton of clarity around just needing to get stuff done better, kind of like Joe said. The current status quo of operating buildings and the technology that runs it isn't necessarily meeting those needs that we need to meet today. And so I think there's clarity around, okay, we need to do something about that. I don't know that there's clarity around what to do about it, but I think there's clarity around movement that we've never seen before off of the status quo.
And I would even say real quick to add to what James said, there's a chance, and we can talk about this more, that the urgency to do something, but the uncertainty of what to do is driving us into a position where we're buying for buying's sake versus buying to solve a problem. And the example I can give you, if we look at, you noted earlier, is actually, I forget who went through this, but density, verge sense, you know, those are space utilization technologies. At the end of the day, they deploy a sensor or different types of sensors in buildings. You can measure how many people are there. You can measure movement. You can measure how your space is being used. There's probably 30 to 50 companies that do this. Now, of course, there are some leaders. Those are 2 companies that have raised the most money. They're probably market leaders as well. But I have talked to facility management companies that have said, we have clients that are buying these sensors because they think, oh, that's going to help me get people back in the office. Now, that's maybe part of getting people back in the office, but there's a whole lot of other questions around return to work. One of them that I've heard is, you know, the survey data from the actual employees isn't really matching up with actual coming reattendance or attendance into the office. So I've talked to facility workplace, you know, VPs of workplace, let's say, or VPs of real estate, just, you know, the person in charge of the buildings in terms of the kind of the client facing part of the building, at least, who've said, I'm very confused. We do surveys every month, surveys every 2 months. A lot of people say they want to come back 2 to 3 days a week. We're open now. No one is coming back, or 5% of our employees are coming back for even 1 day a week. So that's a problem. A sensor isn't going to solve that problem. But to buy a bunch of sensors and say, oh, we're fixing that problem, or we're solving that problem, you might get to a point where a year from now, oh yeah, we bought all these sensors, we have all this legacy hardware. We didn't really look to see, is it open? Is it closed? Can we use it in all the ways we want to? But man, we've spent millions of dollars on sensors. We could have this kind of recoil or reversal effect where a lot of people then say, oh, I spent too much. I don't think that, that's almost 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I'm not saying it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but we're at this position where, yes, there are needs, but it shouldn't just be a free for all. Let's just buy a lot. And in some cases, the rounds that are being raised just look a little big. Just my personal opinion. Those just look like large amounts of money for my sense of those markets, without knowing anything about the companies specifically. And that kind of gets to the question of a little bit of frothiness.
Hey, Joe,
Yep.
that's
So-
interesting what you say there. If what you guys are saying, and it all just kind of, it corresponds with what we're hearing, that there's money and people are ready to buy, and people are going to start buying for the sense of buying. I'm going to suggest to the purveyors and so forth and people on this call that there's a heightened sense of responsibility to not take advantage of the heightened, there's money, there's a need, there's a sense to move, ESG and all that. Take a breath and say, all right, this time around, perhaps we'll sell with some real thought and intentionality behind it, and not just selling for the sake of selling.
That's a good point.
Great point.
John, I was thinking that this is kind of a different kind of theater. We were talking about theater back a year and a half ago with health stuff, and this is kind of a different version of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've continued to hear about this whole, occupant experience thing, and it's fuzzy. What does it mean? I mean, we've seen some really interesting things like, I'm in my office and it knows I want coffee every day and all these things. And I'm kind of stuck here in the past. Thank you, James Dice, for pointing that out.
Sorry. I was sitting there feeling guilty about that.
I'd like the temperature right. Okay. Why don't we start there? I'll get my own coffee. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not to say those things wouldn't be good and they make spaces more enjoyable and productive and all of that, but we're encountering regularly the massive deficiencies in these buildings that, forget about the cost.
Yeah. Well,
So James,
go ahead, James. Yeah, go. I'll make my point after.
I was going to say, hey, it's Mark. Hey, James, Joe, how you guys doing?
Good.
So,
Hey, Mark.
So my question, along what John was saying, or this, from your two perspectives, whose responsibility is it to pay for the occupant experience if the building is a tenant-based building? Is it the building owner, operator? Is it the tenant? Because I'm hearing a lot of conversation in and around that. Well, is it the building owner? Well, to keep the tenant, you would think, and to, there's that side, which we all know. And well, it's my responsibility. I have 3 floors for my employees and I want to make it, the right, I want it healthy. I want it safe. I want to create that experience. So from y'all's perspective, whose responsibility is to pay for this stuff?
I think that's a little outside my circle of competence. I've seen both. I've seen lots of trends, large employers wanting to control the experience across their entire global footprint. And then I've seen the landlord saying, we really want this asset to be worth more, and therefore we're going to try to make the experience better, right? I've seen both. I don't know what it should be. I'll default to someone else on that.
Yeah, I don't, it's a good question, Mark, but I don't know that we yet quite have clarity on who is responsible. I mean, when you're leasing a building, there are standards around, you get a tenant improvement budget. if you're the tenant to fix things. And I think in instances where on a specific, specific projects, specific buildings, specific tenants, what I've heard is, we can give you an allotment from the tenant improvement budget if you are looking to improve the experience, and you can pick what's under the bucket of experience. That is maybe where a landlord or an owner of a building would often go first, right? Well, I give you this budget, you sign a lease, I give you a budget, you can, it's there for you to use. But as it becomes more of a standard, I want a certain level of tenant experience, that might be, that answer may be less differentiated. You do have good data out there to maybe, as a quick analog, you do have good data now that buildings that are LEED certified actually lease for more, have higher occupancy, they have a higher value, but that's partially because if you have higher occupancy, that'll lead to higher value, because the way you value buildings is just based on the net operating income in general. So they're all somewhat linked. You could argue there's indoor air quality standards now, earlier stage, healthy building standards, earlier stage, of course. You might get to a point where we're doing all of these standards or having our buildings check the boxes, because we know that will attract more tenants. And then the tenants know, oh, well, if this is well certified, or if this is, I forget the name of the specific indoor air quality standard, but if this is certified for all of these different standards, I know it will have all the things I want as a tenant. So I could see things maturing to that level where, yes, there's more value here. We, as the owner of the building, have confirmed there's more value, so we're willing to invest up front. And then the tenants themselves are looking only for buildings that are not only LEED certified, but LEED plus well, plus well or fit well, plus so on and so forth. That's where I think things will end up. I don't know if that's a 2-year, a 5-year, 7-year. My sense is it's not 2 years. It's probably not 10 years. It's probably somewhere in the middle. And that maybe doesn't directly answer your question, Mark, but I think it does give you some sense of how I see the decision making and the arbitration process, maybe informal arbitration process between owners and tenants of space.
But I guess, Mark, as leases get shorter, as we move down the line, it's going to be down to the real estate guys to really offer, the best services to attract their customers. But then you might find that the occupiers want to enhance some of those things with more staff-related type features rather than just the general well-being. I don't know.
Yeah, and to all y'all's point is that I was talking to a major REIT last week, and they brought up the concept of the occupant experience is the new amenities they are selling to the tenants, which I thought was an interesting approach. And I asked again, what do you consider the occupant air quality, knowing how many people are in a conference room and any, all the stuff we all know. So I don't want to get into it. But
real quick on that point, Mark, and actually there was another point that I forget who made it, maybe John, it was you, but to connect to that, occupant experience is yes, driving a lot. There's clarity, if you will, around the fact that we want to deliver a better experience to occupants. I think there's some clarity on the side of the REITs and the owners of real estate. We may be able to drive higher occupancy or higher lease rates, actual rental rates if we do this. There's, I think, clarity on the side of the companies that have the employees that, if we invest more in occupant experience, we'll get people in the office more. That'll be advantageous because we're not forcing anyone to come in. We're just making a really good experience for them that they want to be a part of. And I think we will find that 100% working remotely is long-term may be problematic. I think having some type of hybrid, and hybrid may look different for different organizations, but I think hybrid probably makes a lot more sense. We'll see. I may be wrong. I may be right. But the thing about workplace experience is it's very nebulous, right? It means different things to different people. Hasn't necessarily been completely defined. And it's a little interesting. If we go back to pre-pandemic, there were workplace experience apps. By no means were they nearly as significant. There weren't companies raising, $100 million or more dollars. And what I had heard, just word of mouth at conferences, meeting with individuals, was that these apps, which probably weren't as functional, but they were largely as functional. You had a phone. It allowed you to interact with different parts of your workplace, book rooms, get into the room. So if you forget your key card, you can use your phone to do that, things like that. What I had heard in general was we got a lot of downloads, but we don't get a lot of daily active use, right? If you look at a lot of tech companies, they talk about daily active users, monthly active users. You want as much daily and monthly active use because that's a sign that people are actually getting value out of the app. And I generally heard, I didn't see a lot of data, that we have a lot of people downloading these apps. They aren't really using them on a regular basis. And now it seems like on one hand, the expectation is there will be more use because you're not in an office. So if you get to a building, you don't have a desk there, but you know you can reserve a desk. Are you going to pull out your laptop and find a place to work, or will you just do it on your phone? You'll probably just do it on your phone. So there's more strong use cases. But I also think, we may go back to a point where, actually what we didn't realize was while we thought people would use these apps every single day, they use them once a week or they use them twice a week, which, so I guess we might have a regression back to the mean. And the mean for the workplace apps, if you take out the fact that there was a pandemic for 2 years, but just if you look at the 5-year history of, or so 5 years history of these apps, the consistent use was not always there.
But Joseph, I think just to expand on Mark's point, and I think Mark, there's a spectrum of things. Part of the challenge between the building owner and the tenant is there are things that are under the tenant's control, and there are things that are under the building manager's control. Things like, the temperature, the lights, and the door locking is all under the building owner's control. Things like making the coffee and the, ordering from the restaurant and doing bookings, in your office space. I want an app that's for as a tenant, I'm going to do that's my app for my rooms. I don't want others to see what my rooms are like. So there's boundaries there that need to be crossed over, right? And I think part of the challenge, we've had this discussion too with some of our customers, there's a challenge with where is that line cross over and how much does who control, from when is the handoff and how much do I offer as a service versus the tenant making your coffee and then controlling the coffee machine. Man, that's the tenant. You have to go do that. Changing the temperature, that's under my purview, right?
I think that's where you get into the realm, Anno, of there being just a lot less clarity. Some of that I think the market will decide. Some of it may be market by market. Even certain markets where you have a lot of a certain type of industry and not a lot of another type of industry. Markets where there's more, reading. I think it's Castle Systems, Castle with a K, make access control software. They publish, I don't know, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, but every few weeks. Some data on, I think, the top 20 metro areas, how many people are coming back. And they've been tracking this, I think, for a year and a half now. They have some interesting, it's free. I think you can maybe get better data if you give them your name or more detailed data if you give them your name and your email address. But what they show is that there's a pretty wide range of, New York, San Francisco, and to some degree, LA, very little occupancy. Some of the markets in the South, Southeast, Texas, even middle of America, a lot more occupancy. That fluctuates, of course, and there are some seasonal changes. Summer, I think you have less occupancy because of vacations and so on and so forth. But we could very much see a situation where in certain markets, certain amenities, certain things are delivered by the tenants, and in other cases, it's the owners or the landlords. But in general, you raise a good question. There's less clarity there on exactly how all that works out.
Speaking of clarity, can I get can you go back to the core benefit or benefits of this occupancy tracking? So, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that are being pitched that are being the reasons why the owners or tenants are buying these products? What's driving the purchase decision?
So I'll speak, and then James, I'd love to, if you have some thoughts here too. I would say that a lot of the go-to market pitches are maybe a little too nebulous. It's just like, it's framed as like, we'll get you safely back into the office. But that's a big goal. That's not really a use case, if you will. What I can tell you, I've seen this data actually from CBRE. It was a couple of years ago out of their Asia, I think their Asia headquarters, one of their Asian offices. It had this great report all about space utilization. I think it was called Space Utilization. So if you Google just CBRE space utilization and then APAC, maybe just APAC at the end, you'll find it. What they found was that there's a pretty significant misalignment between size of occupant or size of conference room, how many occupants, and size of meeting. So you had over 50, maybe even up to 60%, 60% of all meetings were 2 or 3 people, but more than half of the meeting rooms, in at least the buildings they profiled, were 6, 8, 10, bigger, much bigger. So you also had just a shortage or a perceived shortage of conference rooms. And that was a really common challenge before the pandemic, where you had everyone in the office, everyone's trying to find meeting rooms. So space utilization sensors can help you identify what's actually occupied. The other, I should note, challenge is that sometimes rooms are booked and they're not used, and then no one else can access the rooms. And there are kind of crude solutions where, if you don't hit a button on the iPad that is outside the conference room within 5 minutes of the booking, it goes back into the inventory for availability. But if you come into the room, forget to hit the button, 5 minutes later, you've lost your reservation. Somebody else has reserved your room. They come in 10 minutes later and say, I have the room. You think you have the room, and all of a sudden, even if you just all agree on some outcome, there's interruptions there. There's time there. So you have all these challenges around conference rooms that better data, not only about what is actually occupied, how are we using our conference rooms, which conference rooms are being overutilized, underutilized, that actually has a lot of value. And there's not a lot of good ways to do that without actual sensing of data, because the iPad on the side of the conference room sometimes works, but doesn't always work.
Joseph, because of the pandemic, when you first talked about this, I got the impression that some of the buyers view the occupancy sensors as a way to essentially enforce social distancing. Is that a factor because of the pandemic specifically, why they're motivated to do this?
That is framed. It's framed like that in some of the marketing collateral. I just haven't seen a lot of real world scenarios where, so the sensors themselves, there are a few different types of sensor, like core fundamental technology. There's PIR, passive infrared. That's good for motion. That generally can tell you a lot of motion, little motion. It doesn't really tell you there are 3 people sitting around this conference room.
Right.
There's video-based sensors. Those do. And I guess there's different ranges of how much resolution do you have. Those also, though, aren't great because some people don't want a camera watching them, right? There's a security issue. There's radar, there's LiDAR, there's even other, so there's a lot of different, so depending on what you're using, you actually could figure out, are people too close? However, they need to then probably have an app on their phone that will warn them and tell them you're too close to that person. You could argue at the end of the day, you might know I don't want to get close, or I do want to get close. You go to conferences now and you can get sometimes a necklace or a wristband or whatever is green, yellow, red. Green, I'm fine. Yellow, happy to shake hands, but let's keep our distance. And red, to stay away from me. That's a much simpler way if you got a lot of people back in the office. And if you want to just know how many people are in my space, the access control solutions might do that for you. They might just say, Castle Systems is a good example. They're giving data generally and aggregated to say that 40% full in Austin, Texas, 10% capacity in San Francisco. I don't know those are exactly the numbers. I'm just giving examples. But so from a social distancing enforcement or information point of view, it's mentioned, but I don't know that I see that as a driver from a buying point of view. Yeah.
So I was just thinking that we've been saying on and off that what we do here, controlling air and controlling HVAC, is really complex, and maybe controlling people is even more complex, or trying to control the happiness of people. So let's move on to another subject. Any thoughts or any questions from anyone? Maybe for James.
Yeah, no, I have one.
I was just going to add to all that.
I had one as you look out, Joseph, is that virtually everybody who's on the call is dependent upon, what goes on in commercial buildings or in the building world. And I was really interested on whether you're seeing any clarity on what's, when you look 18, 24 months out, the new construction versus retrofit refurbishment. Because they do actually fit in 2 different markets, because retrofit refurbishment and a lot of things we've been talking about are occupied buildings as opposed to the things being prior. I think, James, would do you think there's anything coming down on the side of what might happen for new construction versus retrofit and refurb?
Can I just comment on the last 20 minutes real quick? Get a couple words in here. So I think there's a little bit of lack of clarity around when you have something like density, that it kind of represents what we would consider like an old paradigm in smart buildings, which is this like standalone point solution, full stack. Like you guys have your smarter stack framework. They're going to cover a lot of different layers in that stack. And really what they're selling is occupancy data from an occupancy sensor, but they're providing the entire stack as a sort of a closed solution. And so I think the thing to point out there is that this old paradigm that we have is not just stack related, it's also use case related, I think, like Joe said. So this old paradigm is we get data from the building and we analyze it. We put it up on a dashboard, or we throw it into an app, or, like Density has an app for the occupant and a web app for someone doing space planning. And it's important to note that like that old paradigm is it basically just stops there. I'm going to analyze occupancy data. But I think where the clarity or the confusion, as I would put it, is it doesn't go as far as actually integrating into someone's true real life workflow. So if I'm actually out there planning out spaces for my REIT at a portfolio level, does that actually get into the true workflow of planning out how much space I need, where I need it, what I need it for, what types of activities? Usually they're doing that stuff outside of an app like Density. And all it's really doing is showing them data that could feed into that workflow, but there's still no connection to that workflow today. So I think that's like the next step as far as like actually defining out in a use case. A use case is not throw data onto a dashboard. A use case is who's using this, who's logging in, what are they using it for, what are they doing next, what's the exact step-by-step process that they're going through. And I feel like there's a lack of clarity a lot of times around, we're going to solve space management, when really you're just showing occupancy data on a dashboard. And there's a huge difference, there's a huge gap there between analyzing data and actually integrating into someone's workflow. And I think that the next paradigm shift as well is it's not about those two use cases, right? So if we think about occupancy data in a building, how many use cases could occupancy data enable? Tens, hundreds? It can enable you to do just about anything better in the building. But when you look at Density, or when you look at Density's competitors, it's all about those two use cases. I'm going to help someone find out where to work, and I'm going to help show a space planner some occupancy data, right? They're not really aligned around integrating in with HVAC to help control zones better, control ventilation better. They're not really aligned around other types of use cases that would be enabled by the occupancy data. So I think there's still some room to grow. If a company like that's going to be worth $1 billion, there's some room to grow into actually enabling better experiences on the top of occupancy data. And I totally forgot the question that we were actually on. I was just responding to the last question.
Yeah, I just asked James about, as we're moving on, when, have you got seen any clarity on sort of 18, 24 months out where new construction versus retrofit and refurb, because, the people on the call are dependent upon the building space, and they are two very different ones. One is new construction, but the other one is the occupied building, which is a different market for those people too. And I was just wondering whether you see any changes, whether new construction will eventually go down or retrofit go up. I don't know. You've seen kind of any clarity on what might happen there?
Joe, you have any thoughts on this one?
It's still, I guess I don't know that I have.
I don't.
Yeah, I don't know that I have strong opinions either.
Next question.
Yeah.
Okay, move on.
No, I was trying to think of something. Yeah.
Okay.
So James, I think you made a great point, and somebody just said on the chat, so they're selling features, not businesses. So they're very point oriented. So how can we get past this? How can we start to think about integrating or bringing all of these systems together, or is it just going to take time for people to figure out that?
I think at first it requires us to acknowledge that there's clarity for the industry at large. So a lot of this conversation so far has centered around the office buildings, right? There's clarity for office building folks. And then if you look at like us in this conversation, it's like a smaller circle inside of that circle, which is like clarity for the nerdy folks that support that industry, right, with technology. And so I think the first thing that we can do, and you guys are already doing this, right, is get the nerds all on one same sheet of music, so that then the same thing can be communicated out from the nerds, right? So I think Smarter Stack framework, Anto and I unpacked it a couple of weeks ago on my podcast, but like that's the value I see in that, and all the work that you guys have done is it's basically getting all of us on the same page so that then we can start reinforcing the same messages. And I guess I'll stop there. I got a bunch of thoughts.
Yeah, and also going along with that is, I think you're also seeing, James, a lot of collaboration between different groups going on between Monday Live, obviously, and what you're doing, what Big are doing, and the coalition, and probably many others. That's going to help us get to the same message, right?
Absolutely. I think that addresses what I see as one of our 4 common myths. So like if we think about that nerd community that we're all in, that we all love so much, I think there's 4 myths. One is that a single product is going to solve all the problems. So I think the Smarter Stack really addresses that, because it just basically says like, where are you at in the stack? You're probably not solving the whole thing, right? Another one is that I think the myth around a single project, one project is going to make a smart building, or one new construction event is going to make a smart building. I think busting that is important, and shifting the focus into an ongoing program, right? Program is technology, but it's also people, processes, funding, this ongoing effort that involves many, many different stakeholders. Another one is competition. So you just said collaboration, Anto. We have this myth that I think everyone thinks they're actually competing with each other, right? But when you look around the industry, everybody probably does one thing really, really well, and they're average or below average at all the other things. And so I think acknowledging where we each play, and that's another place where the Smarter Stack pops up. And then 4th is that I just think we need a learning mindset, right? We can't have the myth that everyone has this all figured out, or someone has the answers, all the answers. Just continuing to kind of move forward and learn together. So those are the 4 myths that I teach in our course, and just try to hit those right up front in the first week. It's basically just like, we need a new mindset around this.
It's great insight.
Yeah, I think the last thing, real quick. I mean, I think the fact that we're having these discussions, I think that we're bringing more people into the orbit. This connects to something I said at the very beginning. More people are coming into the orbit of, how do smart buildings help you do your job, rather than maybe 5 years ago, smart buildings were a little bit more of a niche and nuanced topic that a small subset. They're very siloed, is maybe the easiest way to say it. But it'll take some time still to figure things out. So there's less clarity there too.
Yeah, great. So collaborative is you can't really do smart buildings without being collaborative. Is basically what we're saying.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Other thoughts from the group?
Just to sort of extend that, and your point, James, about the nerds getting together and getting the messages out there. One of the things that we've discussed often in this forum is, and Joseph, I know you're one of the stars that shines in this area, is how your consulting business has sort of abandoned this space in a lot of ways. You know, all the traditional consultants that we used to, that the building owners, and we think that that's where a lot of confusion and lack of clarity has come about, right? Because there's the number of people in the consulting space who actually know what they're doing in the intelligence space has dropped off significantly, you know, compared to when John and I, back in the old days, right, John, used to deal with just this whole slew of consultants who used to, you know, control the space. And so we see this forum and this sort of structure, and, you know, what you're doing, James, and what, you know, what's going on out there is sort of changing the way that building owners are getting information as well, you know, to get clarity.
I want to comment on the collaboration thing. I think, James, you had somebody on recently talking about the more the human side of, you know, user experience, right, around the book in the room and getting the coffee and getting the food and all of those things. And, you know, they get an important business because that's a use case that some owners care about, or building, you know, tenants or whatever, right? Whereas other sides care about efficiency, sustainability, the amount of, you know, the cost of their energy. And I think one of the things that's causing a lack of clarity is there's I think a desire to oversimplify the complexity that goes into making a building run and serve the occupant experience, whatever that gets defined as, right? I've been in lots of buildings in my life, although not the last couple of years, and nobody actually cared about my coffee, and they didn't pretend they did. But now, you know, building owners and operators are seeing that there is a financial value for them to do that. So that's become an important use case. That's only going to be achieved by collaboration, because last time I checked, none of the big four control systems made a little widget you screw to the, you know, connect to the DIN rail and send you coffee, right? But this oversimplification of what is actually becoming a more complex topic is a big part of the problem. You want to add all of these additional features and interactions and integrations. This world is getting more complex, not less. And one of the other things that bothers me, everybody says single sheet of glass, right? Yeah, I have a single pane of glass and it has 40 apps on it, and they're all from different companies. And the only thing most of them do together is they run on my phone, right? I don't go to Uber to do my banking, right? And so I think this single pane of glass is being confused as one app from one manufacturer. That is not it. It is one, you know, physical device or a software device that allows me to do my job. So I think a lot of the clarity comes from us collectively. We need to sort that out and help people understand, you know, it isn't that we're all dumb. These are complex problems to solve, right? And it doesn't do anybody any good to brush that aside.
And they're getting
It's the
more
worst
complex.
acronym in the industry. I was just gonna say the single pane of glass, I think, is the worst acronym in the whole industry. And there's a lot of bad ones. I agree with you, John.
Yeah.
So find the person who originally came up with that, and we'll take them out to the woodshed there, James.
I think if we all just stop using it.
Okay, so expectations of next year. Right? Let me ask that question of both of you.
James, do you want to go first?
Absolutely not.
Okay, no, I wanted to offer. I certainly don't want. I mean, expectations. Look, I think we'll continue. I think you have expectations at different levels. I think we're going to continue to see a pretty robust market for new companies emerging, new companies getting funding. In terms of the rounds, I don't know that we can see bigger rounds. I don't know that we would necessarily see smaller rounds, but I think the catalyst that was the pandemic of getting people to think, you know, maybe technology can work for this industry and that industry, and that's kind of a big trend we're seeing, where we were required to, or everyone, you know, had to use technology to replace some of the physical things that are happening, Amazon, other, you know, delivery, remote work, and Zoom, and so on and so forth. I think that's creating generally a view of, well, is there technology that can make this more efficient? I think we'll continue to see that. I think we'll continue to see some innovation. I think we'll continue to see companies positioning themselves or trying to position themselves as being a help for you to not only return to the office, but maybe it flips to deliver the hybrid experience that I think a lot of companies will fall in that bucket. We may see some companies move back to, we want you in the office 4 days a week. I don't know that we'll see a lot of companies that try hybrid and say, oh, actually, no, you never have to come into the office. That's again a prediction of mine. I don't know that we'll make though as much progress next year as we might think. It might look like now, like, oh, smart buildings are here, everyone gets the value, so on and so forth. But the best general example I can point to, if you've looked at Gartner, they have something called the hype cycle. Very interesting. It's basically just a general framework for how technology is adopted in industries. And it goes from, it starts with the technology trigger. There's what they call the peak of inflated expectations. There's different steps along this framework. Peak of inflated expectations, which is where you generally, the way you can think of it is people are buying a technology because they think it can solve all their problems. Oh, I'll buy this, it'll solve all my problems. Then the next step is there's what's called a trough of disillusionment, where the expectations and the reality were so misaligned that a lot of people decided, oh, actually, this doesn't do anything. And then you finally get to, there's kind of a slope of, I forget what they call it, the slope of productivity, I think maybe. And then they get to something called the plateau of productivity. So it's the slope of, I forget, but there's a slope and then you get to a plateau. And basically what ends up happening is most technologies are useful and do solve some problems. They maybe do not do everything, but they do some things, and it takes a little bit of time to get there. And Gartner will plot all kinds of technologies on this framework. And the difference is some go through that process very quickly, a couple years, some take 10 years. And I think that's actually an interesting kind of framework to where we are. Now, are we approaching the peak of inflated expectations? Are we coming down from the peak of inflated expectations? I don't know. I think that we're in that range. And it'll take us a little bit of time, maybe only a couple years, maybe many years, to get to a point where, smart buildings are widely recognized, have a lot of value, are normal parts of procurement of buildings, management of buildings, and so on and so forth. I'll stop there. That was a little long-winded, but.
Okay. James, what are you expecting the next year or so?
I just had like 50 ideas come to my mind. I'm going to say 2. So I think as you see all these companies raise money, and then all these building owners set their own targets, long term, we're trying to get to net zero or whatever they're trying to get to. I think we have a workforce issue that you guys have talked about a lot, right? But it's in every spot in the industry right now. And so I think we have to figure that out. A company can't raise $100 million and then try to hire from the same pool of people that we already had in the industry before, right? So I think that has to get figured out. And then I've just been doing a ton of, I'll say 3. So the second one is I'm doing a series of case studies next year around creating clarity, and not just like fluffy marketing case studies, but getting into the real obstacles in real buildings and talking about what can be shared across buildings, across building owners. I think that would be helpful for creating clarity. And then third, when you look at ESG, I've been doing a lot of digging into ESG lately. If you look at the full spectrum from setting a target to all the way at the end when you reach the target, the tool sets in that journey are currently very fragmented. And I just have found like a lot of gold in there as far as I think acquisitions are going to happen. I think we still need new innovation. We still need integration between tools. So I think you're going to see a lot of movement there once building owners figure out that the target they've set isn't actually reachable with the tool set and the people they have today. So I'll stick to that.
And we have 47 others by the sounds of it. Okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour, past the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation. Thank you, both of you, sorry, for joining us this week. Video of this will be up tomorrow. Next week, we're going to continue the clarity theme. We're going to have Brian Turner and Scott Cochran joining us, looking at clarity from that perspective, from the MSI perspective. Looking forward to that. So with that, have a great rest of the week. Have a great Thanksgiving. Stay safe, and see you next week. Bye bye, all.
Hey guys.
Thank you
cheers,
all for
guys.
having me.
Good
Thanks,
Thanksgiving, guys.
James. Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you. Thank you, James.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
See you. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.